Hello and welcome to the Indie Bandits podcast. I'm Joe, and in just a second I'll be joined by my mates Archie and Jimmy. But this week, instead of talking about indie games, we're going to be talking about retro games as part of a new series we're doing on the podcast. We decided this week that we'd talk about retro platformers and the ones we loved, but just before recording, Jimmy decided to tell us that they weren't really his thing. So, maybe, Jim, you could talk about your experience with platform games and maybe when you started playing games. Because for me, that's when platformers was the genre of games that got me into games. So maybe you had a different experience.
Yeah, the first game I ever played on the PC, which I then owned, was A Bridge Too Far, which was an RTS World War II game. So that's what got me into it. It was not platformers. I also didn't have a PlayStation for a long time, didn't have a Nintendo, any Nintendo ever. So yeah, I didn't really play any platformers. The only time I ever played platformers was when either you came round on a Friday night or Aiden and brought your system over and we played them on that.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess actually the first one would be Gex, which God, that's going back to like primary school.
Was that the Gex they had at the only school computer we had? Like for some other reason, they had this copy of the original Gex game.
That's the one I've noted. I've noted it down here. It came out in 1995.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've just all aged ourselves.
Yeah. So that was that was the first platform I played on, and I did enjoy it, but for whatever reason, I've just never really been that into them.
But did you enjoy it because playing Gex was literally not having to do schoolwork? Because I do remember that if you finished your work early, and the teacher clearly hadn't prepared anything else for us to do, they'd just let you go on the computer. And most of that, I remember, involved when you could get Gex to work, you'd play Gex.
Yeah.
And when you couldn't get Gex to work, you would just change the settings for the screensavers on Windows 95 and see which of the mazes had the coolest walls, which might be almost as good as Gex. No, I'm joking. I did like Gex.
Yeah, Gex was good fun. I actually thought, it was a reasonable platformer, but it had some quite funny dialogue as well. I mean, the lizard was quite. He had sort of like wisecracking lizard, wasn't he? More than your sort of silent character that just makes the occasional whoop and cheer.
Wasn't his whole thing like he quoted like films or something? Gex's whole spiel was that he was like addicted to television or something like that. So everything he'd say was like, "Here's Johnny" or something, or "Here's Gexy."
I don't know if that was in the original one, in the 2D one, but in the follow up, which is Gex Enter the Gecko, that was on the original PlayStation and the N64 and all that. Mm-hmm. And that was a few years later because I had that on my PlayStation, and in that game you went from TV world to TV world, like all the levels were different themes and genres.
I think the same was the 2D one as well. I think it was all different. It was like you were pulled in by the media world or something like that. I can't remember a huge amount about it, apart from I do remember thinking it was quite funny, and it got me out of doing schoolwork, so that was good.
Do you remember the third Gex game? It was called Deep Cover Gecko, and I remember when I was a young lad, I was getting like the PlayStation magazines. This is when like games were exclusively really, really aimed at like lads, and now they're less so. But I remember they hired it was like some model or something, some like glamour model to be like in the game. So she's like a part of the
I bet you
story.
Remember that.
Of course I did, because
it's only been 25 years since that game came out, but it's still fresh in Archie's mind.
But I remember but there was this advert for it. I remember like a double-page spread of this magazine with that model who was like topless, like hands behind the back of her head, and Gex was like covering her breasts with his hands. And that was the advertising campaign.
No, I do not remember that. I do not remember that ad campaign. I feel I would have if I'd seen it. I don't know if
it was
that
ridiculous.
age I could get those magazines.
I don't remember that game.
Yeah, it was crazy. It's a sign of how things have changed since then. But when you were talking about Gex, that sprung back to my mind.
Well, this is the whole kind of thing of platformers, isn't it? Because you need a.
They were edgy. They had to be edgy or something. That was. But
you need the mascot platformer?
Yeah,
really. I think that's mostly what we'll be talking about today. Because there are platformers that don't have like the mascot or main character, but Gex was definitely vying for that kind of thing, wasn't it?
it was just a big rat
Edgy
race for who
fella.
had that. Because if you were that mascot platformer, you were like guaranteed. I mean, your game was just, it couldn't be bigger than that at the time, could it? Like, if you were the face of the console you're on, like...
Well, Mario's been living off that for like 30 odd years. I mean, the games aren't really particularly great. The ones that, well, in my opinion, have come out since.
I'll disagree with it. I love Mario so much.
I just feel like they half-ass it when they come out with a new one. Mario at the Olympics, all right. Mario watching the TV.
Yeah, when they slap Mario onto any other kind of genre, it's just a kind of... It seems like a bit of a cash grab, doesn't it? Where they just go, yeah, we'll put Mario on it because it'll shift some units. Mm-hmm. We can throw out but we'll not get into Mario Party, tennis, Mario
golf.
Does his laundry, golf. But obviously Mario was Nintendo, and Sonic was Sega, even though Sonic wasn't originally Sega's mascot. But we'll get in that bit later. I think the thing we had with Gex was this was around the time of the PlayStation, and Sony was a new player in the market. So I think we would have seen a lot of these mascot platformers trying to go, look, Sony, you want this guy to be on the front of all the packaging and all the marketing materials. And it seemed a lot of devs went with the idea, make them edgy, because Gex, obviously, manhandling glamour models, was probably quite... It was quite edgy. Everyone's like, look at this lizard, look at this.
How cool is he? How cool
is this lizard?
Look at what he's doing to that poor woman.
That is a different age, isn't it? I bet you that those marketing materials will not have aged well. In an age of hashtag Me Too and
it's so disgraceful. Like,
but that's the sort of era, isn't it? That seems that the mid '90s was games almost going through their adolescence.
Games for boys, really. If you
I was going to say, think about the audience who was playing it back then. They knew exactly who they were marketing to. Well,
apparently it wasn't. I think if you actually. I know now the shift, I don't even know if it is a shift, but now it seems that it's about 50-50 male and female in terms of players, but the female players are often overlooked. And I'd like to know how much that was the case back then, or whether marketers just assumed that everyone playing these consoles was a boy, or whether it was exactly the same 20 years ago, where basically boys and girls were playing almost in similar amounts, but girls were just ignored.
It wouldn't surprise us if girls were just being ignored. Yeah. I think it might have just been based off the whole stigma of kind of
probably
games are for boys or whatever. Because I think they probably were designed that way because maybe sexist tropes of kind of guys explosions and shooting things, and that's just what will make Doom and all that. And then we'll have kids things, I guess, we'll make it a guy character who's edgy as fuck and as cool as anything. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's probably all just based on those old tropes. And I know plenty of lasses who grew up, the same age as us, playing games and enjoying them, and I guess maybe not being bothered about the kind of marketing. But I don't know.
Well, I think that's just how it was back then. They couldn't. Well, they could be bothered by it, but it didn't seem that anyone was sadly taking any notice. Yeah. No marketers were taking any notice of them. It was this very testosterone-driven marketing campaigns.
Look at the fighting games, the female characters in the fighting games back
Dead
then.
or Alive or something. Dead or Alive ridiculous. Now. Yeah, it's still a problem with that. Just fucking.
Anyway, slightly off track here.
Interesting though.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a topic for another day. But let's not fall down the rabbit hole of gender politics in games, because that could be a 2-hour podcast in its own right. But they were all edgy. I think that was the point we were trying to make. This was definitely the market that they seemed to be going with.
Yeah, I've got one question to ask James actually.
Go for it.
What do you think was the last platformer you actually sat down and played?
Bloody hell. I don't know. I reckon we're probably talking 15, 20 years ago, the last time I touched a platformer.
I know what you've played recently, because I lent it to you. You've played Ratchet Clank. You did what's it called? A Crack in Time or something?
Alright, okay. Yeah, I did, yeah.
Well, there you go. I was just curious.
Then I don't know what that's like. 10 years ago.
Yeah, I wouldn't say
Was
it was
was that your? Oh,
No?
was that? I didn't know that was your copy, Archie. Mm-hmm. We both played that. Wait, was that? Did you loan that to Jimmy when we were at uni?
No, I learned that, Jimmy, I think when you were at...
Because prior to that, at uni we had a Ratchet and Clank game on the PS3.
That might have been my copy as well, yeah.
I was going to say that's probably when I played it, Archie. I think when you lent it to me the second time, Chris played it.
Ah, right, there we go. Cool.
Well, fair enough. That was a good game as well.
Yeah,
And
that
would
was actually alright. That one.
technically,
Yeah.
That would technically constitute retro as well, because I'm going the rule of thumb that if it's 10 years or older, we can say it's retro.
Well, then that one then. I did enjoy that one. I thought it was good fun.
Cool.
I think that by that point it had moved on from just platforming though.
Yeah, it was like action platformer.
Yeah,
like,
there was a lot
you
more
had your
to it than
guns
that,
and,
yeah.
You started to jump across stuff and not fall in pits and stuff. I think that the core element to a platformer is that the maneuvering of the character is a core element of the gameplay.
Is there a lava level?
Yeah, exactly. If a failure in maneuvering the character results in death, or just some kind of fail state, then you're probably playing some kind of platformer.
Yeah.
In most cases. I mean, to try and further define platformers, which you can be on for hours, but I think minimal combat is also quite key to platformers. In by that I mean most things die with a one-hit kill. If you get me, it's hit them and they die. Hit them in the wrong way and they kill you.
Do you think that maybe then that Ratchet and Clank probably doesn't count then, because that's like never-ending combat?
Yeah, there's a lot of. That's what I was thinking with Ratchet and Clank. There is a lot of platforming in it, but if it's not an out-and-out platformer. I think the core gameplay is the swinging your wrench around. It's definitely like an action platformer, but not like a
platformer.
Maybe that's why I enjoyed it a bit more then than the typical platformer. There's probably a bit more going on.
So you reckon just the maneuvering a character to not die is probably just not that, you just don't find it that appealing.
I just I mean, what with the older ones was basically you start off at the far left and you must get to the far right, and you have to jump over things and hit boxes or collect shiny objects, and and you say most of the enemies were either you avoided them or you jumped on them or span and hit them, that sort of thing.
There's definitely like one attack move. I think the minimal combat idea is quite common in most platforming games.
If
you get me, like Gex's verbs were very limited. I think Gex could like whip them with his tail or jump on them. I think that was his two moves.
And as you say, the enemies are usually, if they get hit, they're dead. You don't have to hit them. It's only the bosses you have to hit more than once, isn't it?
Yeah, or sometimes there's ones that have like a two-stage kind of thing, like maybe like I'm thinking the turtles in Mario.
Oh yeah, you jump on them, then you jump on them again.
You jump on their their innards, I guess. I don't really call it. It sounds gross when you think of it that way. Like I jumped on a turtle so hard it exploded out the side of its shell, and then when it was all soft and vulnerable, I jumped on it again and crushed it. Like a realistic Mario game would be horrendous to look at.
It would have just gone like curb stomping turtles, and it'd just be awful.
Be monstrous, but I think that's when platformers become more like action platformers, when they have this like deeper combat system. Like Ratchet and Clank had power-ups and different weapons
and stuff. Yeah, that's probably why I enjoyed that.
And you could upgrade the weapons as well, couldn't you? There was a bit more depth to them.
Yep.
The platforming series I have down for you, Archie, is Crash Bandicoot, because you've mentioned it several times on the podcast already, even when we weren't talking about
just unsolicited mentions.
Yeah, Crash Bandicoot was the first PlayStation game I ever played. I think it's the reason I actually wanted a PlayStation, because when did I got mine in 1987, so I would have been 9 years old at the time. I had no idea what a fucking PlayStation was back then. And my brother was like, "Oh, do you want to share a PlayStation for Christmas?" I'm like, I don't know what that is. And the only reason I wanted to get that in the end is because my mum, for some odd reason, found the name Crash Bandicoot rather funny. I'm like, oh, fine, whatever, I'll get that then. And it turned out Crash Bandicoot, at least, at the time when I was playing it, it probably hasn't aged well, but when I'm playing that game, I've got very thick nostalgia glasses on. I still very much enjoy it, but I think if you give it to a person today, that game is probably harder than I remember it, and doesn't probably control as well. But still really good. Crash Bandicoot still, I mean, just had its remaster collection in the past, was a year or so. And I did play that as well. And I don't know, for me, I think those games still hold up, but like I say, very much looking at this through the field of nostalgia.
You got your rose-tinted spectacles on there, Archie.
The funny thing about Crash Bandicoot, though, is that it was never, like, Sony never wanted a mascot platformer, as far as I'm aware. It's they kind of wanted to separate themselves from Sonic, Sega and Nintendo, by not having that, saying, oh, this is just, like, this isn't backed by any cute character. But it was like, because Crash was like so successful, like, it was huge. Apparently, Crash was the only PlayStation game, only Western developed PlayStation game that sold over like 1 million units in Japan, at least until in the first half of the PlayStation's life or something. So this game was like fucking huge, and it was kind of, it became the like self-appointed like mascot for that thing just through like fan popularity.
Yeah, I saw the is it Ars Technica?
With the programmer, yeah.
That is a brilliant video, and yeah, I think in that he mentions that they called themselves the unofficial Sony mascot.
And I think in that game as well, like it's obviously more limited than say Mario 64. Mario 64 opened things up significantly. Well, Crash Bandicoot's like more of a, if you had a classic Mario, like a NES Mario game, and you just made it 3D, so you're either going left to right, but they kind of added the extra dimension of going forward and back.
But yeah, they did it kind of up and down, didn't they?
Up and down there, that kind of thing. Like,
but in 3D.
In 3D, but I still think if you look at that game, it obviously doesn't like look as good as, say, what you get on the PlayStation 4 now, but I think they were really smart with how they handled their visuals back then. I still think it's an appealing game. All the colours are really nice, things are very low poly, but they used the limitations, I'd say, much better than what Mario 64 did. I still think Mario 64 is an okay game. I'm not the biggest fan of it. But on a graphical level, although Mario 64 is technically more impressive, visually, I think it's much, much more ugly than Crash Bandicoot.
It's a lot of flat, empty colours, isn't it, though? It's very cartoony and it's aesthetic.
It doesn't look as good, I don't think. Mario 64 has the old school problem of like that generation of lots of empty, unused space, and loads of games did this. And I know it's them showing off like, oh, you've got an analog stick now, you can control Mario in 3D and go up and down, left, right. But in terms of like that surviving, like that idea, like it just feels so out of date now. It feels like empty and a little bit dull. While everything in Crash, like it doesn't feel like there's a pixel wasted throughout that entire game. I'd say even
the levels are really tight and compressed in.
Oh yeah, but it works. Like
they're like corridors essentially through the woods or jungle.
But I think that's why it's so popular. And I'm not saying Mario 64 wasn't popular, but if I, like my mum and dad loved Crash, all those original 3 Crash Bandicoots, but it's because they were so straightforward. If you give my parents like a game and there's too much like ambiguity of where you're supposed to go, like in Mario 64 where it's not just go a direct arrow where you're supposed to go, they'll just lose interest and be like, yeah, I'm not playing this anymore. Crash, you knew exactly what to do, and it was so. I think it's much more accessible compared to the other platformers that came around about the same time. Like even Spyro, like is good, but I still don't think if you give Spyro to somebody in Crash, I think most people who aren't into games would probably prefer Crash over Spyro or something.
Well, it's very linear. How said like Spyro and Mario 64 were a lot more open world platformers, weren't they? You could go to different parts of the game and do different tasks, but Crash Bandicoot is, here's your start and go forwards. You can't get lost, can you?
No, it's exactly that. But I think there's a more to it than that. I think Crash, like, this isn't why I liked it, but I think it's just a part of probably why like a lot of people did like it. It's like, if you look at Mario, I know Mario starts on Mario 64. I'm using that as a direct comparison because they came out within 5 months of each other. You have that thing at the start of Mario where you can like twist his face, but he's like really expressive and all that, and he can like pull his ears out and they spring back, and it's good fun. It's silly. And it's like a nice tech demo before you play the game. Like, ooh, look what we can do now that we couldn't do in our previous console. But once you're past that, Mario's just this. He's the same state he is like in terms of like expression than he is all the way till the very end of the game. While Crash will like do big cheesy grins and all that, he'd be like flattened, and there does seem to be a lot more like flexibility of what they did with the Crash Bandicoot character than what they ended up doing with Mario. And for me, when I was like a 9-year-old kid who like loved like cartoons and all that. That was great. I was like, this is like, I'm like playing a Looney Tunes cartoon. This is fantastic.
That was part of their focus, though, wasn't it? Again, going back to that Ars Technica video, they said like Crash being like an engaging character was one of their main focuses. And I forget that I can't remember the exact stat or figure the devs gave, but there was a lot of processing power given to Crash. Like it was like I'm fairly certain like 75% of their available polygons were dedicated to Crash.
I think it was like, I'm pretty sure it was like a third of the polygon budget was given to Crash. But that's a common thing, really. Like a lot of games do that. If you play like
I get that. Like you have high res models, don't you? And like you can tell which people are main characters and which ones.
Yeah, exactly.
You're like, this guy in a cutscene's not going to be around for the next one because he's a really cheap looking model.
Like, if you play, like, Halo or something, like, I know this is a bit off tangent, but it's the same logic of kind of you're seeing the butt of your gun more than you're seeing anything else in that game.
Yeah, so they're really high-res models.
Yeah, so when your character, Master Chief, died during Halo, it showed you a death animation, and his character model was so much higher resolution than everything else. And it's the same for Crash. But it makes sense to do that. It's such a a smart use of your kind of, like, your technical budget.
Yeah, but I think there was also that focus on in the Crash series that you had. They were really. It seemed like they were really clear that Crash had to be appealing, especially since they were vying for this sort of like unofficial mascot. They were like, if we become the mascot platformer for this new platform, this new system, we're laughing. So we got to make sure that you can't miss Crash. If you get me, Crash is. Yeah. Crash has got to be like the be all and end all of this game, and he's got to be appealing and he's got to be emotive. And here we go. This is where I lead into sort of like an insult to Mario, and where the Mario games are good. And you were saying like the world and landscape of Mario 64 is very open and empty. Mm-hmm. The control and momentum of Mario is really good, and that was always there. I think that was always Nintendo's focus, to make Mario fun to control, and he is. But Mario as a character, like, is more two-dimensional than his first outing. Do you know what I mean? Like, Mario is like a horrendous Italian stereotype who has like 3 lines of dialogue. I don't even know who Mario is, which maybe that's what they're going for, because if you've not bothered about the character, you can't be like, Mario can't put you off his games, because just Mario is so flat and devoid of personality other than like stereotypical Italian shit. Whereas like Crash might put you off if you're not like into this edgy thing. You know what I mean? Like his kind of weird zany shit. You like, if you're not into it, you might be put off the game.
Yeah, like Mario. If you look at like Mario when he first came out, he came out on the NES, and when they could only handle like X amount of colors. What was it? Probably like 10 colors on the screen or something silly like that. Maybe more than that, but not a lot. So his design's very specific.
Yeah, his arms exist. He wears dungarees so that you can see his arms.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like, and he has his mustache, so you know where his nose is, and he has a hat. It's a very clever design. This is the same for all these games back then. Crash's back is yellow. It's got that yellow kind of like shape on it, just so like his back's more interesting. And he wears, because
you're looking at it most of the time you're playing.
And he has those fingerless gloves just so you know where his hands are. And it's just like all these clever, and the same for Tomb Raider. I know everyone thinks Lara Croft's like a sexist design, and I guess in some cases it is, but there is a logic to like why she has like a tank top in the middle of these freezing cold things, and it's just to make sure you know where her arms are all the time, and it's not one consistent ugly colour. And obviously, with the newer games, you don't have to worry about that as much, because you can afford a larger polygon budget, but jackets on them and so forth. Like, but yeah, like Mario is just like, I don't know. I'm not the biggest fan of the Crash design. Like, he is like, it's like he's a very mid-90s kind of like that,
with his cutaway jean shorts or whatever they are.
Like he's just a bit out of date now, but it was time.
Does he wear like All Stars? I mean, off-brand Converse All Stars. Has he got like little high tops? Has he got like little black Converse high tops?
No, the red, like the big red shoes. Yeah.
What came? I guess was it? Did they model him off Blink 182, or was it the other way around?
In the early to mid 90s, like animation was going through like this big renaissance and was kind of cool again. Like Disney was doing all their films, and they were like making like bank off like Aladdin and the Lion King, and their TV department was releasing things like DuckTales and fucking Darkwing Duck, and they had the big TV renaissance as well. But the Looney Tunes
and other duck-related
animation, yeah. But Looney Tunes were doing things like Animaniacs, Tiny Toons, and there's probably some more that I can't remember. So they like
Space Jam.
That was
around that time.
97, so that was a little bit later. But Crash was based on that kind of like Looney Tunes like Renaissance thing where you gotta have the big expressive face and like he's got to be an animal for whatever reason.
Obviously, maybe it's easier for the player to project onto an animal than a human, because if a human doesn't look like you probably find it harder to identify with them. Whereas an animal, you probably anthropomorphized animal characters. Humans can probably just go, well, I'll just project myself onto their personality.
Yeah, I think it was just the expectation. I mean, I think it's just what had been successful before. Like Mario was a big success, and he was always a human. Well, a cartoon human.
Within the confines of those games, though, would it not have been a lot harder for them to make humans look accurately human compared to making a wacky animal look like a wacky animal?
Yeah. If you look at anything, there's a game called 40 Winks that came out on the PlayStation as well, and they used children as their main character. You can play as a boy or a girl. But again, I think you're like what. Just off the back of what you're saying, James, even when you try to do humans cartoony, they often just look a bit crap. Like, they did, at least during that time, they never looked like that good.
So, before you were saying it's kind of funny you saying it's a difficult game. I've heard. I've not actually played much of Crash. I never owned it back in the day, and I didn't buy the rebooted remake Majigga not too long ago. But you said it's very obvious in Crash what you're supposed to do, but it's also a very difficult game.
Oh yeah, it's just precise platforming. Yeah,
but I think that's kind of fun that they draw you in, going, you know what? Look at this. You could look at a screen of Crash and go, well, I've started here, and if I go down, well, that's just the start of the level. I can't go any further. So I've clearly got to go up that way, down this singular corridor. And if you hit enough of the face buttons enough times, you're like, oh, it does this kind of like lively tornado-y spin.
That's his main. You can spin and jump in the original one. They added more moves as the games went on, but like in the original, it's spin and jump, and that's it.
But yeah, and that's it. You get the idea straight off the bat, don't you? I think what they did with the original Mario games, but added a third dimension to it, but also made it really difficult. Where I don't think Mario ever really went for that. There's like tricky sections in Mario games.
See, I don't think Crash was designed intentionally to be difficult. I think it was just that guys working at the time were doing their first 3D platformer and hadn't quite worked out how to design a game that was balanced
or forgiving.
Yeah, or forgiving. They knew how to set certain things up, like how to like tell the user to jump on something to kill it or spin. So like the basic kind of like like language of video games. But in terms of making something that's like not nails hard, I think they still had some some things to work out. Because by the time you get to Crash Bandicoot 3, it's probably the easiest out of those original 3 games. But that came out 2-3 years later, so they'd obviously had time.
1998, Warped, right?
Yeah, Warped's great. All those Crash games are great. Like, they're so good.
I've got it noted down here. 96, 97, and 98 were the original Crash trilogy. And all PlayStation exclusives, no other platforms, nothing, just solely PlayStation.
Sony bought the right franchise there, like.
So I'm not quite sure, Archie, are you saying you're a fan of Crash Bandicoot?
Oh, it's class, man. It's really, really good. I love it, but I was speaking to somebody at work, and I was just basically saying I appreciate Mario 64, but I didn't play it till I was, I'm going to say 17 or something like that. So I played it, I think, when it was on the Wii Virtual Console. And for me, that game to me handles like garbage now. And that's pretty controversial to say.
Don't think I could go back to it.
But people say to me, oh, Crash handles like garbage. And I'm like, you know what? It probably does. But I just know what to expect from it. So, but I had a hard time like appreciating Mario 64. I know it's a good game, but I just came to it. You know what I mean? Crash is great.
But yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? If you don't have the nostalgia to prop up an old game, then it's quite that there are some games that like age brilliantly, and and then there are other games where if you didn't play them the first time round, you are definitely going to have to like forgive certain aspects of it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
There's and I found on the Switch with a Switch Online subscription, they give you some old free Nintendo games and Super Nintendo games, and I've invested in those overpriced plastic models of old consoles as well. And obviously a lot of the games on them I've played anyway. But then if you go out and try some new ones, sometimes you're like, oh my god, this is just garbage. Like it's not for me. I didn't play it when I had my original Mega Drive or Super Nintendo or NES or whatever.
Yeah.
And I can't forgive it now. Like I've become I'm used to playing games 30 years into the future. Like so much has changed that there's certain things where you go, I can't believe they didn't think of this. I can't believe they thought like this was acceptable back then. And in some cases it's down to limitations, and you tend to forgive that. But other times you're like, you could have programmed a better jump for this character.
Yeah.
Like you thought this was the best a jump could be. Even the original Mario had a good jump.
The funny thing is, here's a semi-interesting fact that by pure coincidence, Crash and Mario have the exact same jump time. And I just think that's a weird little thing. You laugh at James. James is laughing, but I think it does play a part as to why these two games are kind of like put neck to each other. If you don't nail that jump, your platform is not going to be any fucking fun at all. Like
there is a specific code to like a Mario-esque jump, and. It's very Anaraki, even though James is like, this has killed James.
Cracking bit of
you like that one?
little factoid that, Archie.
It's like when's the film out, Archie? But
hey man, I found that dead interesting.
I bet isolation's not being boring for you, Archie. But,
to be fair, I did watch the Game Maker's Toolkit YouTube video on the indie game Celeste, and it does have a section where it looks at various 2D platformer jumps throughout
James, get that bookmarked.
throughout the years, and it looks at their acceleration, hang time, and deceleration, and there's some very clear there is a lot of depth in this. If any indie devs listen to this, will be like, that was a damn interesting fact, Archie. Thank you for that. But to be fair, I think if you've ever done any kind of coding at all and tried to make your own platform game, or just learn the ropes of platforming, the like Mario jump from the NES game, that piece of code or code that acts in that way is something you'll cover, because there's many ways for a jump to feel like shite in a platformer, and because jumping is about 90% of what you're doing in these games.
Your main mechanic, the jump, has to be the most satisfying thing you probably do in that game. And I know you're gonna laugh, James, but I think it's a very interesting fact.
It wasn't necessarily about the jump not being...
whatever.
No, not that the jump isn't a crucial part of the platformer. It's that Crash Bandicoot's jump and Mario's jump take exactly the same amount of time. Like, where did you find that out?
I think... I can't remember.
Did you watch the 3-hour extended version of that Ars Technica interview?
No, he's 2 TVs, 2 systems, just pressing the jump. He's like, oh my god, look what I've just stumbled across.
I just imagine playing Mario just like, doing, and like, well, where have I seen that before? Just like, turn the switch on the disc.
Hold on a second.
This jump feels oddly familiar.
No way. He's just sat there like, no way. I'm going to change over to the other one.
James, get online. And writing all these things like, what is it, Archie? What? Mario and Crash jump at the same height?
Sometimes you're like, the depth people go into for... At least with Archie's, like, there was an application for this, where you go, Crash's jump is the same time as Mario's jump. They're essentially the same.
Well, yeah.
Fair play.
I get that. That's not the funny thing. It's if you'd given me 1,000 guesses, I would never ever thought Archie was about to come out with that sentence.
No, exactly. it's so no, exactly. The fact itself is useful, but yeah, the factoid of.
If someone is like, if people haven't played the original 3 Crash Bandicoots and they want to play them, I'm actually going to say, don't get that remaster collection. Play the originals if you can get a hold of them. It might just be the most biased thing, but like because that's where my nostalgia lies. They don't look as good, but they play better, which is really weird. There's something wrong. Those new ones are like really, really good, and I do enjoy them. But there's something a little off with the handling that makes the games feel not unfair in the way that you're playing badly. It just feels like there's something working against you sometimes when you're playing.
I've heard the hitboxes are a bit off.
Yeah, it's something to do with the
ones.
hitboxes. It's not like if
there's more pixels to the new objects.
It's something like that. It's like it just makes the game a bit
edges curve
frustrating.
off now, and you can like slide off edges that looked like you could land on them previously.
Yeah, it's annoying.
Back in the day, it was pixel perfect. It was pixel perfect, and everything was a square or a cube.
Play the original 3, then play the remasters.
I've got a question for you, Archie. In the remastered version, is the jump the same as any remastered Mario games that have come out? Did they nail the jump again?
Yes.
Oh my god.
No, as far as I'm aware, from the newer ones, they've because each game, games have handling models depending on how the character controls, and from what I'm aware from these newer ones, they've used the same handling model for all 3 games, and that might sound like, oh, that makes sense. That's a convenient way of like making less work, but the slightest tweak might throw that handling model off in the 2 games that handling model didn't come from, if you know what I mean. So it makes things feel just inaccurate at times.
So in the original trilogy, there was different handling models for.
Yeah.
I assume they adapted and updated them.
Well,
as
yeah,
time
exactly.
went on to
Because
make
they're
them
like,
better.
crash handles like this. Now can we make them more responsive or more precise? And they just tweak it. But your entire game is built around how that character handles. So the minute you change that a little bit, something is going to feel a little bit off. But it might just feel off because I knew how these games used to handle, and if you come at these blind, you might not even notice. So there you go.
Yeah, probably not.
Maybe not, but again, you might be like going to clear a chasm, and you'd be like, well, this chasm looks about, X long, I need to clear it. Fortunately, I do know that if I jump, I'll be in the air for about the same amount of time as Mario, so... No, but if you did change that, and you go, hang on, he's went back to Mario jumps, or Crash 1 jumps, or, this blanket... system or this blanket system or model, then some of these aren't going to work exactly as you thought. So you'd be like, well, I felt I could jump, I'd jump here at this bit of this tuft of grass and I'd make the jump. Now I don't, because it's actually like a few pixels later or a few pixels earlier that I have to jump.
No, that's good.
Oh, it is isn't it? It's not even nerdy. It's full on anorak, this kind of stuff.
What do you mean anorak?
Like someone who's like properly into like every aspect of the thing they're into, like people who like plane spotters and train spotters and bus spotters and stuff.
Yeah.
They're like hardcore into it, aren't they?
But I think the term anorak is being replaced with nerd now, or geek or whatever. But then the internet would argue about which is what and what is what, and that's why I didn't really want to use nerd or geek on the podcast. And I thought anorak is all encompassing. Like if you like really love the minutiae of your hobby, then anorak covers it. And I assume it's because these like plane spotters and train spotters were probably out in their anoraks in like the pissing rain to look at
That might actually be it.
Those guys should get some real hobbies and start looking into like the jump times of platforming games. Something like, really worthwhile.
I mean, obviously, Joe, we haven't even talked about your platformers and the jump times within them as well. So I don't know
there's
if you
more
want
to come.
let us know. Stay tuned for more jump times, folks.
Strap yourself in, listeners. This is gonna really fucking heat up.
If you
any
thought that
second.
factoid about Crash Bandicoot was immense, then just wait until we hear about Sonic. It's going to blow your nuts off.
You might want to sit down.
I enjoy Sonic for the themes, not for the
What the
pixel heights of jumps.
You played for the articles, Joe.
political nature of Sonic and
I like the I like Sonic for all the deep themes and shit it goes. No, it's
you're not one of those DeviantArt types, are you, Joe?
no, I'm not constantly looking up Sonic fan art on the internet. Jesus, it's like this is one of those things where when you're just like, can I like something, but please don't lump me in with some of the other people who like this, because
That's
I'm
like
not
everyone who's into any sort of like nerdy or geeky hobby. You get lumped in with every other person that ever plays it.
It's not even the nerdy or geeky hobbies. I think anything that anyone is like into, you always have the people who just take it far to well beyond what I think is an acceptable level to like anything.
But then they become the poster people for that hobby.
because the mentalists are always the most entertaining to read or write about. So I guess they're the ones you probably hear about. You don't shift newspapers by writing story of someone who likes this thing, likes it a moderate amount, and doesn't have an entire underground dungeon dedicated to it.
Which is a nice segue onto your underground dungeon of Sonic.
Thank God I built that dungeon, because in times like these, it's handy to have an entire space dedicated to, the fastest mammal. Right, yes. So if you hadn't guessed, Sonic is my pick. As I alluded to earlier, in many ways, Mario platformers are probably better platformers in terms of how they control and how they play. But like you said, Archie, it's like that's not everything that makes a game. Like, gameplay is like hugely important. I think most games I play, I enjoy down to gameplay. But also, this is a retro episode, so most games that I enjoyed when I was like 5 or 6 was not down to gameplay. I wasn't sat there going, man, this game would be better if Sonic's jump height was adjusted.
So it was more in line with Mario's.
Exactly, man, those programmers at Nintendo nailed the code for Mario's movement and jumping. It just it feels great, I'm like, no, I don't want to run around a fucking stupid world filled with mushrooms as an Italian plumber when I can be like an edgy 90s character who smashes robots to bits. And also, it's gonna shock you, but Sonic was the first platform game I ever played. So here's the running theme of the episode. The first one you play is going to be the one that sticks with you. And when I picked up when I got gifted a Mega Drive as a kid, Sonic was the tie-in game for it, and the bundle game. So you open the box, you turn on the console, you're like, holy shit, what's going on here? It has that big Sega ident with Sonic running backwards and forwards across the screen, and apparently it took a unnecessary large amount of memory for the audio clip of Sega coming on the screen. And
which
then
audio
Sonic,
clip, Joe? Do that again. Sega. Whoa!
Whoa, my God. That was insane. It sounded just like the Sega thing.
Exactly. And, whereas if you look at the original Mario game, where just Mario stood sideways on, it says 1 player start, 2 players start, and it's just him at the castle, you click start and it goes. You're like, cool. And, I think even in the third, in Mario 3, they had him behind the curtain on stage or whatever, and it was like, yeah, cool. But, Sonic comes on, it has the whole ident and him, in the title card, and you're like, oh shit, this looks cool. And then when you hit the start button, it does that weird sound effect, which I'll also dub in, since I'm fucking amazing at these. And then the next thing you have is you're in it, and the music's a fucking jam. Do you know what I mean? That even if you don't know the games, I haven't played them much, if I played the tune from Green Hill Zone Act 1, everyone's like, yeah, this rings some bells. And if not, you're like, this sounds fucking class. And then you're into it, and you're like, oh, this is mad, and it's bright and colourful, and it looks now like what Mario looked like at the time. Not Super Mario World, but after that, you're like, this is just a mental aesthetic. And then by that point, you're like, your 5-year-old brain is exploded, and you're like, this is class. Games are this for me. I will happily sit in front of this for hours, not getting any further because I'm 5 and not very good at games. But it doesn't matter. I'll sit in front of this TV for hours, just trying to get to the 4th level, the 5th level, the 6th level. You know what I mean? It's
yeah.
I wasn't sat there going, oh man, this can be a bit janky at certain points of controls, or there's a few things they could have done here to make the controls better. That's not what kids want, and I think this is what, at the time, platformers, and especially these mascot platformers, were for. I don't think there's any 30-year-olds. Well, no.
Now
I'm
that
talking
might
about
be.
Sonic. Hang on, yeah, but I don't know if there's any 30-year-olds who would get into Sonic back in the day. Which means, are there 60-year-olds who are mad Sonic fans?
Maybe.
Possibly.
There'll be a few. If they were playing Sonic, they probably should have been playing it with their nieces and nephews. or their own children.
Maybe that's a reason for them maybe having the nostalgia factor now at 60, is because that was a game that they played with their nieces and nephews or whatever.
It could be, but they need to really stop drawing art of all the characters in sexual positions. But this is the thing. Like, obviously, ignoring all that weird seedy underbelly to Sonic. Like, Sonic is not a bad game. There's a lot of reasons it is bad. There's a lot of reasons it's good. In terms of pure platforming, it's probably not as good as some of the games in the Mario series in terms of gameplay. But
how many were there?
Sonic games.
Yeah, I mean, like, of that era. I don't mean like now.
For the Mega Drive, which is or Genesis, if you're in North America, there were like 4 titles that were like core titles.
Right.
But obviously you had the original one, Sonic 2, Sonic 3, and then you had Sonic and Knuckles, which was meant to be actually part of Sonic 3, but there was like a whole hoo-ha about getting the game out on time, and basically what they did is they split the third game into 2 games and released the latter half of it when it was ready.
That's so weird.
Yeah, but that Sonic and Knuckles thing is like the coolest thing ever, because it was a cartridge you could put another cartridge on top of, and it would change the game. Like, it was like, this is not something you can do with like discs or like digital downloads anymore. You can download like updates to your game, but imagine if you just had this like game that just like modded all your other games. I mean, it only worked on Sonic games basically, but basically Sonic and Knuckles was a standalone game that if you played it, that like the story took place at the end of Sonic 3, and you could play on as either Sonic or Knuckles, the echidna, because given name plus animal name is basically how the naming works in all Sonic games. But it had like a little like slot on it, which was exactly the same as the cartridge slot on the Mega Drive. It had the same connector, so all you'd do is you'd flip back this like lid on the top of the Sonic and Knuckles cartridge, and then you could put the Sonic 3 cartridge on top of that, and when you booted up the game, you would have Sonic 3 and Knuckles, which meant you could play through all the Sonic 3 games as Knuckles. So as like an extra character, which obviously at the time was like, what is now like DLC that you pay like a $5 or a $10 for to just unlock one extra character, but at the time was like was mind blowing.
Yeah.
And you could do the same with Sonic 2, which was like a completely different game. And
do you still like Sonic now? Could you go back and play Sonic 1, 2, and 3 and still like, I'm having a good time?
Still do.
I just think Joe's having a good time, and I just don't want to step in and say I don't like Sonic.
Still, no, I still enjoy them, and recently they released that. Well, not too recently now, but they released that Sonic Mania. I don't know if you. That was when basically Sega realized for years they have been like mistreating this IP and not making games that were particularly very good. So they basically took the devs that had ported the old Sonic games to like mobile phones and tablets and PC and all this, and done all these ports and had done them very well. They got these guys in and they basically made their own Sonic game that was inspired by the old Sonics, and they kind of made this big tribute almost to the old Sonics. So this game like handles like old Sonic, but it's got like a few tweaks and updates that makes it feel a little better and a bit updated for modern times. You can play through like some old levels, but then there's like levels inspired by old levels, and then entirely new levels, and then there's different like cast members you can play as. So that is like, they basically gave the franchise to like fan developers, and the fans went and made like a really good product out of it.
I think it's crazy that Sonic's, it seems like it's never made a successful, I mean in terms of sales it has, but in terms of kind of like people actually liking them, but it's a successful 3D Sonic game. It feels like this series can't make that transition and have it work.
It had the, I really liked Sonic Adventure, which was their first one, but I was like one of the only people in the world who like owned and liked a Dreamcast, it seemed. So I, and obviously Sonic for me was the big draw to getting a Dreamcast, and the idea that like Sonic was actually like fast, which like that's his whole like supposed draw, and his games aren't actually very quick. If you play a Sonic game, I think generally they give you this first level in which you can just like, curl up into a ball and like roll through the level and like do loop-de-loops and do these mad jumps and all this cool shit. And then after that, it turns into platforming again. So the fact that Sonic's quick is really inconsequential for like the rest of the game. There's, and Sonic Adventure, the first 3D one they had on the Dreamcast, had all these quick sections. Apparently, like, player input was completely inconsequential and they were effectively cutscenes. So, but, again, I was probably like 10 when this game came out. So when someone had you like controlling Sonic and then you go, oh wow, you're like zooming in a ball through loop-de-loops and shit and you're being chased by a fucking whale, which is like the opening level to Sonic Adventure, as this like whale destroys a pier behind you and you're in this big like chase sequence towards the camera and you think you're controlling it. You have like a minor amount of control. Like you can deviate Sonic from his path, but it won't cause you to die.
Right.
So you're technically not playing the game, which again is like, not ideal in terms of game design, but...
No, I feel like that's a major flaw in a game design, that.
It is, but also,
games do it all the time these days.
I was flipping 10. You know what I mean? I was like, this is cool. Like, I think this is cool. Like, I'm enjoying myself. Like, this is what the whole point of a fucking game is. Like, it doesn't matter if I'm like, oh, that whole like scripted sequence was really cool, but my input was like minimal. Like, Call of Duty will do that as well. Like with these like sections where you're like, oh, that felt like that was really really cool, but you're like, it didn't really matter what you did as a player. But still, yeah, after that, apparently they had, well, you can see it, like, just go on Metacritic and look at it, like, the ratings for any Sonic game, like, afterwards, it's just, like, they've spent years, and they've had a few, like, almost comebacks where you're like, oh, that game was alright. People thought that game was okay. Yeah, I don't think they really know what to do with the whole
I think
franchise
they're
or series.
not that bothered about it. I think it just sells really well because kids don't have a gauge for quality. As long as it's got Sonic in and his entourage of fucking furry mates, like, I just think kids are going to be fine with it if they like Sonic. Those games, I think...
Why do you dislike it so much, Archie? So I don't really have any strong feelings one way or the other because I never played it.
I just don't think it's entertaining. So I played it after I'd played like Crash and Spyro and Mario. So
and you like Crash, don't you? That's like one. That's a game you like. Yeah.
It's alright.
That's a given.
I've got this interesting fact about Crash if you want to hear it. For me, I played after I played like Mario, Spyro, and Crash. And when I played it, like, at the time I didn't really find it entertaining, and I think it was because of, I think what you're saying, Joe, like, when it was, like, the lack of input. But when I go back and play it now, I know people who, like, would much rather play, like, a Spyro over a Mario. It's just fine, like, I'm not criticising them for that. But for me, like, Sonic is either you go fast, where you're not doing anything, or you go slow, where the gameplay is just really dull and boring. Like, for me...
Even as a fan, I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
That's the problem they had with the 2D ones.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of this was fixed in Mania, but you are right. Like, there are long sections where you curl into a ball and momentum carries you through all these loop-de-loops.
And you do nothing.
Cool.
Like,
and it's a bit of like, it's a bit of eye candy for the player almost. Like, whoa, this is mad, and you're smashing through boxes, and like, you have no input. Like, it doesn't matter what you... Just don't press anything on the controller and let it run its course.
Well, if you compare that to something like Mario, where it becomes like all about like very precise jumping at certain times, and you can have like a rhythm with that, but you're still in control of keeping that rhythm and that momentum going, and that doesn't really exist in Sonic for me. The going fast stuff, it's just like, okay, this is like a spectacle, I guess, which is fine, but it's not interesting for me at least. But and when you're going slow, it's even worse, arguably. Like,
there is a like a sweet spot, I think, in Sonic games where they do get it right, and there is like where you build up momentum and are running through a level fairly quickly and jumping and doing actual platforming. But I don't think Sega realized this. For at least in the 2D ones, I think there are some levels where like, why is Sonic jumping up vertical platforms very slowly, which don't allow him to build up momentum, which when the whole game's meant to be about speed, and Sonic has this very slow build up speed. Like, if you if you do want to get two consoles out and hook them both up to a TV at the same time, Archie, to compare times, if you hold right on Mario and Sonic, you'll see that Sonic has a much slower speed build up.
Yep, it's terrible. It's like it's such a. I just want to like. This is the fastest guy alive, but you know, it's when he gets running.
But he builds up momentum, so the game's. But once you build up momentum, it's quite fun to play. But a lot of the level design, I don't think didn't really work with that.
Yeah, it's two gameplay styles working at odds with each other, and none of them are that good. For me, just personally, like it just doesn't have the focus on it. It should be one or the other, and yeah.
Which is where Sonic Mania nailed it. Like
actually.
Sonic Mania is really good. So they still included the a few of the old levels, or what they did is because they made the levels longer than they used to be, they actually just like sort of like stitched them together. So instead of like 2 or 3 acts of a given world, what they did is they just sort of like stitched those levels together to make them a longer level. So where you'd normally have like the end of Act 1, Sonic just keeps running and it sort of turns into like the second level of the original Sonic game.
Okay.
But then like for what is essentially the second act of a given level, it's a level designed by them, which has the aesthetics of the old Sonic worlds, but I think they're just much better designed.
Yeah.
That they allow the player to like, there are areas where the player can build up speed and use their attacks. And they also created a new like previously the original Sonic didn't have the spin dash, which is where he crouches, spins on the spot, and when you release the spin dash, he rolls off at like full speed, which sort of like got rid of this whole slow, painful, excruciating momentum build up they had in the first one. In Sonic Mania, they added one where you can actually do that in midair, and upon landing, it'll be like you stopped and did that spin dash to give you the quick start. So that's kind of cool. So you can run and jump, and then whilst you're in midair, you press the jump button again, and Sonic sort of does this kind of, it has this building up whirring noise, and the second he hits the ground and has a speed boost, which makes the whole thing flow better and makes it really playable. But this is like you said, this is not something that the games in the 90s had. It was, the original one had none of this, and you just had to slowly build up momentum. The second one introduced the spin dash, which you can only do if you stop dead, which is like, for a game that's built on speed, you don't want to be encouraging the player to come to a full stop.
I actually do have an interesting fact.
Let's finish the podcast with Archie's fact of the podcast.
We're setting a precedent here. I think we should have one every single episode now.
This is coming hot and heavy.
Yeah.
Naughty Dog actually hired the level designer of Sonic so they could help make Jak and Daxter. There you go. Isn't that an interesting fact? Because they didn't know how to do things that were more open and complicated, so they got him to kind of sit down and draw the entire things out. Pretty good, eh? It's a fact.
That is Archie's fact of the podcast.
Fact of the podcast! So in summary, Sonic's awful. Probably the worst game we've ever spoken about on this podcast. And
Mario's dull and boring. Archie still doesn't like Zelda.
Mario's
Who else
class.
We got a slate? James thinks all platformers are shite. That's the take home for today. Thanks again for listening to the Indie Bandits podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts from. For more information on indie games and now retro games, check out indiebandits.com or find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, and YouTube. Thanks now.